Alrighty. So tonight we're going to be doing quadrants and hemispheres. But firstly, just to show you what you will be sent in the future, can you tell me when you can see that?
Yep, I can see that.
So, good. So this is the what I've created, I think, what a chart interpretation form. So and this is something that you can print up every single time. You know, I might either put it as a page on my website, so you'll know how to access it. You know, by putting in a URL. You know, it'll just give you this as a, and then you can print it whenever you need it. You know, it's probably how I'll do it. But this is to be filled in each time you do a client's chart. So say you've got friends who want natal interpretations, you know, so say you start to get your Pilates class into yoga and into astrology, you could say, well, I'll do your chart. And you would take the first person, you know, you'd say, okay, so you fill your name, the birth date, the time, the place, and the country of birth. So that's all their data goes in there. And then you would, I'll be teaching you to do this, but you'll be hand drawing the chart, having used a bit of software, because I'm not going to teach you the maths, because that's where a lot of people just don't, you know, but because there's so much software, we don't have to do the maths anymore. Because computers have taken over, really, you know, we don't have to do maths anymore, right? So it's all done for us, which is quite an advantage, really. So, so you'll be hand drawing the chart in. So there's a blank wheel, and then you put the aspects of each planet in. I'll be teaching you how to do that as well. But this is where it starts to, where you start to go through bit by bit of the chart. So you'll be counting things like positive planets, negative planets, which are the fire and air are positive planets, and the water and earth planets are called negative planets. That's not meant to be bad, by the way. Negative is just like a polarity, right? And as in a battery, you know, you've got like the plus and the minus kind of thing. So elements, you put in the fire planets. You'll be using the symbols here, so you'll be drawing just, you know, the symbols of the planets if you want, or you can write their names. Qualities, so you look at the cardinal, fixed, mutable distribution. And tonight, what we're going to be doing is quadrants and hemispheres, okay? And then you're looking at chart shaping. That's another lesson. Looking at things like ascendant, midheaven, the ruler of the chart, the rising planets, all these things we're going to go through in turn, right? And it's just about getting familiar with the chart, so you know what to do. And then you'll be going through these as well. So you'll have the cusp that Leo is, the house cusp that Leo falls into, the where the sun's ruler is, various things. So you're looking at by sun, by sign. So for example, you're a Virgo, aren't you? Yeah. So yeah. This would say here sun, so it would say by sign, well, you put Virgo, and you've got it in the, is it in the 10th or 11th house, I think?
12th.
Put in the 12th. So you put Virgo 12th, and then you put in any aspects, which we'll be covering as well. But this form is essentially how to do a chart, right? It's kind of how you do the chart. So and then you've got things like nodal axis, so you put the nodes in, and what it is it's to help you to understand how to, you know, by you're analyzing the chart, right? And then using the foundation book, which I'm also going to send you as a complete document. So it's like a book that you can, like a sort of is a whole document, 50 pages of it. But I'm sending you it in bits at the moment, but I'm going to send you the whole lot. And then you get to work out, that's how to analyze a chart ready for interpretation. Okay. And then, you know, you will be doing your clients a very good service by picking the chart apart into and working things out, you know. And the more fluent you do that, more fluent you become, the more, you know, the more astrology, the logos, if you like, of the logic of the stars starts really flowing through you, you know. So, you know, as you know, I mean, you know, other astrologers like Robin Ray, for example, you know, it's just something that starts to the communication, you know, of understanding how it works. So so that's one document to show you. I've got another document as well, which is called the Chart Interpretation Guidelines, which is this one. So this will come with it, okay? So this is how to go through the chart step by step. So once you've cast your horoscope, then it's time to interpret it and to find the right keywords and phrases. So you go through this, and then you start to look at the underlying themes, so forth, and you can add things to that. And you look at the general chart shape, you count and group the planets, you start to summarize main character traits, and then you go into these subsections. So inner self, motivation, energy. So inner self is like the sun, motivation, energy is Mars, emotions and automatic responses, the moon, intellect, communication and studying would be Mercury, and then Venus, which is the likes and loves of life. And then you get into things like Jupiter stuff. Here's some things about Jupiter, Saturn, you know, and relationships generally, which is kind of starting to look at the angles, and then other areas of life. You see career, home, early life, travel, hobbies and interests, nodal axis. So that, and if you do all that for your client, you know, they will be very happy people because they would have got a really good chart reading. So that's how I'm going to be doing it. So that's just a little introduction today. So you can see what I'm planning to send you, right? It's like, you know, this is part of the kit that you're getting. And I think I'll be putting, as I said, I'll be putting those documents, I think probably on my website. So all you would have to do is put the, you'd know what it is, and then you can click and print one off. Unless you can also print one off and then copy that if you've got a photocopier. You know, either way, it's how you decide to do it, you know. But basically, there we go, right? And then I've got a foundation book, as I said, which at the moment is at about 53, 55 pages or something. So that's going to have a little bit more info in it as well eventually. I've almost got to finishing it, but it's a sort of like a general kind of guide to the beginning parts of learning astrology. This first stage is just getting the chart sorted out, you know. Yeah. So okay, so have you got your handout of that was sent out last week, which was yeah, brilliant. So we're going to look today at hemispheres and quadrants. And I thought that maybe, since you have, you know, I've actually got some of your people's very close to you, I've got some of their charts. So I've got like Robin Ray's chart, I've got Justin's chart, I've got Samantha's chart, and you gave me Jess's chart details. So if I go through those with you tonight, then we can look at quadrants and hemispheres with respect to those charts, because you know these people, you know, and therefore it may become a little bit more, you know, you understand a bit more because you'll hear, you know these people. That's what I could, you know, I mean, it's like perfect, you know, when you know someone and you know how they talk and what they're like and so on, you know, the astrology will come alive for you very much. Okay, how's that sound?
Okay, great. Yeah, perfect.
Good. All right. So I will share the screen again, and we will start to look at. Let's look at your chart first, okay? And tell me when you can see that on the screen.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to start with hemispheres. All right. And with hemispheres, what you're looking at is the idea, and same with quadrants. Okay. You're looking at the idea of being inside a big circle, being inside a big sphere, if you like, a hemisphere, which is a half a sphere. But you've got 4 different perspectives. Okay. So where we're standing, when you're sort of like standing on the ground looking up, you'd be standing the equivalent of standing here, and you've got the horizon. I talked about the horizon last week, you know, and if you look above you, you've got 180 degrees of sky dome above you. So that's the and in astrology, that is called the southern hemisphere. It's all flipped around. All right, it's not. It looks like it's meant to be north, but it's called the southern hemisphere. Okay, and so the southern hemisphere is very much focused around the idea of planets being out there in the world, right, interacting with everything that you see around you. So there's a kind of emphasis when you have planets in the sun, in that top half, the top hemisphere. There's a little bit of an emphasis on that, like a sense of you know, what are my objectives with respect to the collective? You know, what am I trying to do socially? You know, so when people have a lot of planets in the top half of their chart, that top hemisphere, then they're the sort of people who are very extrovert, you know, looking outside of themselves for solutions to problems. So often, not so much the case these days, but often, you know, famous people or authoritative people who'd climbed a ladder, if you like, to you know, or climb the sort of pyramid of life to try and get to the top, as it were, would often have quite a lot of planets in the top half of their charts, because it's almost like they're trying to reach up for something, you know. So when you see someone with, say, you know, lots of planets in that top half, then you can say things like, you know, well, you're very good at self-projection, for example. You know, you're good at putting yourself out there.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like seizing opportunities, or being quite ambitious, career oriented, because there's a sense of with the MC up there, you know, that's kind of, you're looking at houses 7, 8 and 9 are relationship houses, okay, and so that's to do with another person. It's to do with going out into the world, you know, to relate to someone. And who's that person who's walking beside you? You know, that's a kind of a status thing. It's related to where you're going in life, what you're doing, you know. So the relationship orientation is
outside
of the self. Does this make sense to you? You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So someone with a lot of planets, right, in say 7, 8 and 9, right, would be all about the relationships, right? And they get very focused on them. Oh, I must, you know, and it depends what those planets are doing. If it's the sun there, then it's obvious, and someone's very clearly conscious of being into relationships. Other planets can be quite not so, you know, not so into it, you know, like it might be sort of, you know, just anyway, but different planets have different meanings. So that's one sort of thing. The other half of that hemisphere, because we're looking at the southern hemisphere as all 6 houses, starting with 7, 8, 9, and then 10, 11, 12. And 10 is the career house. Okay, so that's sort of usually where the MC lies, around about there. It tends to be a floating point in the chart, but you know, it tends to be, you know, 10th house of career, 11th of groups and friends and associations, also considered to be a lucky house, and the 12th house to be the house where one works behind the scenes somewhat in life. Okay, so it's kind of like a sort of slightly almost like a bit of a retreating house, because there's a lot of unconscious stuff going on there that the person works on over their lives, you know. So it's sometimes keeping a little bit of distance from the world can be sometimes quite good with planets in the 12th. But also on the other flip side of that is that when the 12th house is the house of the collective, or the house of the greater unconscious, the collective mind. And sometimes people with the 12th house stuff, not only do they tune into the world's current sort of situation, they really feel the world, as it were, but they sort of know what people want to a certain extent. They have a kind of an inner sort of understanding of what the current of the world is, should we say. But so there we go, you know, I mean, and you have there, you know, you've got your sun and Saturn and Mercury and Pluto. So you've got quite a lot of planets there in the 12th, you know, but we'll get onto that in a minute. All right. And basically that focus in that top hemisphere for you is, you know, not so much in the relationship sector, but there's sort of Venus in the 10th, Jupiter, Sun, Saturn, Mercury, you know, and Pluto, all in that houses 10, 11, 12. So in the southern hemisphere, there's a lot about the idea of enjoying working with others, being active in the outer world, being quite externalized and group oriented. And you run a group, don't you? Is that right? You run a group?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. Absolutely.
Classes,
So,
yeah.
so there you go. You know, I mean, that is a way of looking at that. Now, there's further divisions of the hemispheres. Okay, so then you got the southern hemisphere, which is houses 7 to 12, and the northern hemisphere is houses 1 to 6. Okay, so the northern hemisphere is where one could be very introvert, right, and introspective. So someone with planets below the horizon, Now, in traditional astrology, this is the difference. These hemispheres that I'm talking about in modern Western 20th century psychological astrology, this is what I'm teaching at the moment. But in traditional astrology, this is the difference between what's called a day and a night chart. And you might have heard that. I don't know if you heard that yet, but the day chart is the sun above the horizon. And that is a big key to, you know, how the person will be, generally speaking. So, you know, above and below the horizon, a day chart, because if the sun is above, so you were born at 9:30 a.m. in September, and the sun was above the horizon. Yeah. So you have a daytime chart, right? And I think that's doubly well scored for you because you've got your moon also below the horizon. Because of that. But my learning on, I'm not fully fluent with traditional yet. I'm getting there, but I'm not completely fluent with it yet. But basically, I'm going to teach you this particular style of 20th, you know, Western style of astrology, and in a way, you know, a general integration is what's happening anyway. Gradually, it's going to all integrate together. You know, the different branches. But the northern hemisphere is about being more introverted, and finding the ways to do things within the immediate environment. They don't look outside of themselves for things. So there's a lot of solutions going on. Now you've got a light there. You've got the moon, one of your lights in the northern hemisphere. So, you know, there's a strong pull towards that hemisphere as well, and Mars, which is also, you know, the planet of action. So there's quite a few things, you know, also there. Now, but again, there's not much in 4, 5, and 6. And so you can now you look at another hemisphere. So you've got the northern hemisphere has a 1 to 6, the southern hemisphere has a 7 to 12, and then we split the line down the meridian line, which is the midheaven and the nadir. This is the nadir, also known as the IC. This is the midheaven, and you split the hemispheres again, and you get the eastern hemisphere on this side, and then the western hemisphere. So to read the eastern hemisphere, you're counting houses 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3. And to read the western hemisphere, you're counting houses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And have a look, of course, in your chart, you're a perfect example of having an emphasis in one hemisphere. Because as you can see, you've only got the South Node and Chiron on one half of the chart, right? That's really, you know, that's a very, very clear example of having a strong emphasis on the houses 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3. So Eastern Hemisphere. And this is where you are predominantly self-oriented and making decisions based on your own wants and needs. So there's a leadership ability, you know, quite the self-starter, self-motivated, and all these things. You see, it describes you because you started a group, you ran a group. I remember you've told me some stuff about what you've done in the past, and it did sound like you are quite group-oriented, aren't you? Or you do sort of get going with things. You sort of start things up, and is that right? Or
yeah, so we had I had my own Pilates studio for like in the end about 11 years.
Yeah.
So we only just got rid of it actually just before COVID hit, which was quite lucky. So yeah, I mean that's all I've ever done is teach Pilates and gyrotonic and do that.
Yes.
With other people.
Absolutely. So that's a kind of like quite a good sign there. You know, I mean, it sort of clarifies it. As I just realized, I've got two monitors, right? And when I do share screen, the pictures of the people, as it were, get really small and they go right over the far side. And if I drag it across, I'm now talking to you underneath my camera, which is a much better way of doing things, right? So all these planets here, you've got, as you can see, the whole host of your planets are all on one side, you know. So there's a really strong sense of answering for yourself, being the author of your own destiny. You know, you are the person who is in control of your own life, really, you know. And maybe, you know what, maybe it doesn't matter quite so much about all these other things because you focus a lot on this side. You know, that's what one could say. There's just everything about life is on this side of the chart, you know. and had you been born, say, a few hours later or earlier or something else, then of course the distribution of planets would be different. They'd be in the same, approximately the same degrees, but they would have been in other hemispheres, or so it shows that you've got that emphasis, on one particular side.
So when there isn't any planets in a house, does that mean you feel there's still an element of?
Yes,
do you see what I mean? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I mean, I wouldn't. My empty houses aren't forgotten. There's obviously still elements of that in me. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely, 100% yes. And the answer is yes, there are, because when you have an empty house, take for example.
Oh, because then it's aspects, isn't it? It can be. Yeah.
Take for example your 9th house. What you're looking for information about the 9th. Okay, you follow this cusp line because that's the beginning of the 9th house. Okay, and it goes into the sign of
Gemini.
Very good. And what is the ruler of Gemini?
Mercury.
Very good. And Mercury is here in the sign of
Libra.
Very good. And Mercury is what degree?
10.
Yep. And what else is close to 10 in the chart here? Oh, look, I see something close there.
Venus.
Yeah. And what else have we got? We've got something down here. What's this?
Moon.
So can you see how Mercury in Libra is well aspected, because these are dotted blue lines. I'm going to get onto the aspects next week, and for a few weeks we'll be doing aspects because they're extremely important. But the idea here is that your Mercury talks. Venus listens to Mercury very nicely. So does the Moon. So this is a very nice little configuration you have here for personal planets. Mercury, Venus, and the Moon all together working well together is a real gift in life, actually. So you're very lucky to have that. It's very nice to have that, and you can use that to great benefits in your life. To recognize it. Once you become aware of it, you can excel in that. Use it very well. So your 9th house, which is actually, let's call it the house of traveling or long distance travel, or we could call it the house of learning, like higher education. But that Mercury there, what's happened when you've gone abroad? Mercury's in the 12th house here, right? It's kind of actually also in the 1st house in whole signs. But can you recount to me a couple of big stories when you went abroad? Is there any themes that you might recognize from, whenever I travel, this happens or that happens, or to do with communications? To do with emails or tickets or trains, planes, buses?
No, I've had luggage lost before.
Yeah.
That was like the whole holiday. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I mean that.
Does that happen more than once, just by chance?
No, just the once.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That might be that could be linked to it, to the fact that Mercury's in the 12th. But there's a sense of that's how to start to read what is an empty house. When there's no planets in it, you go to the cusp of the house, the beginning line that rules the house, right? Or that begins the house, and then you look to where the ruler of that sign would be. So your 9th house cusp is Gemini, and Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So everything about your 9th house is held here, right? And so there you therefore open up the interpretation to say, Mercury and Libra in the 12th, and then that making good aspects to Venus and good aspects to the Moon.
Right.
So if we do another one, let's do the 6th house cusp. Okay, as you can see, it's an empty house. Okay, but what would you do now, Steph? You see an empty house, and what are you going to do? You would go, the first thing I'll do is go
to the cusp.
Absolutely, there it is. Right?
Which is Pisces.
Correct, absolutely. And the ruler of Pisces?
This is now where I get confused with some of these.
Yeah, all right. So there's a traditional ruler and a modern ruler. Okay.
Yeah.
So but
I want to say Neptune, but maybe
yes,
it's not.
correct.
It is. Oh, okay, fine.
Correct.
Yeah.
Neptune is the modern ruler.
Yeah, so
Okay.
there's a few planets. I don't know why it's the bigger ones. It's the Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. I kind of need to get, you mentioned about getting those keywords that I can then remember those. And for some reason, I get them a little bit mixed up. And then I think it's, anyway.
Just give it some time, and
yeah.
So the modern ruler is Neptune. So you were correct.
Neptune. Okay. Right? Yeah.
The traditional ruler is Jupiter.
Jupiter. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Jupiter and Neptune rule your sixth house. So let's have a look what they're doing, right? Well, the sixth house. What's the sixth house generally mean? What keywords can you apply to the sixth house?
Is it relationships or is that 7?
That's 7. The descendant starts the relationships.
That's it. Yeah.
That angle, and then the 7th house, 8th house, and 9th house are the whole area of relationships. But that 6th house, let's just have a look at that again. So we say, so 6th house is day-to-day work, the day job, if you like, but also like the health and routines. So it's to do with bodily health and routines, and also to do with jobs and working. So it covers things like employees and also your employers, what they're like. So it kind of describes them a bit. So we go, okay, what have we got? Well, you've got Neptune as the modern ruler. We'll go back to that in a minute. Neptune is Sagittarius, which is a teaching kind of thing, right? Or quite demonstrative because it's in a fire sign. Okay. And then Jupiter is actually the ruler, and you are a Sun-Jupiter conjunction. Yeah, which of course is a strong identity with philosophy or learning or expanding life or taking opportunities. And it's in Virgo as well, which happens to be the 6th sign. That's a kind of a coincidence. It just, Virgo is the 6th sign of the zodiac. And this is the 6th house. Although, as I explained last week, with primary movement and secondary movement, there's a sort of the houses are their own thing, one layer, and the zodiac signs are another layer, and they kind of fit on top of each other. So so Jupiter brings your 6th house is potentially quite lucky, because of the Jupiterian influence. Jupiter is in Virgo, and it's quite a long way away from the 6th house, from where it would like to be in Pisces, but it's with the sun, which gives it a nice boost. So I would say being a teacher is a Sun-Jupiter thing, right? I can speak that from personal experience because I have a Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Leo, and here I am teaching some astrology. So, it's kind of, the Sun-Jupiter thing. You can tend to, you might see it in someone, like that sort of Jupiterian influence, but you'll notice it in yourself, the ability to want to expand outwards, to be recognized for your knowledge and for your learning, and how you can help others by what you do. So the job that you do, teaching Pilates, it comes from a place of wanting to help others, and so that's what I'd say about that. And interestingly enough, the square is to Neptune, okay, and the sun. So you've got Jupiter square Neptune. Jupiter's at 21, Neptune's at 19. And we're going to bring the sun in there as well, because this is a clearly extremely important configuration to know yourself by, because the sun, of course, is the core sense of purpose and inner self and inner purpose, if you like. So sun is also squaring Neptune. So it's interesting that your ruler of your 6th house is Jupiter square Neptune together, right? They're squaring each other. And in a way that could be well, I suppose with Jupiter square Neptune, you're sort of looking at this sense of being maybe quite a sort of like there can be quite a lot of exaggeration with Jupiter square Neptune, but there's a lot of artistic talent there as well, particularly with your sense of quite dreaminess, like your imagination might be quite strong. You can have quite strong imagery coming through about a sort of a utopian or idealistic world, but there can be quite a lot of sometimes possibly a little bit impractical about things, but with maybe a sense of being possibly overlooking some things. So it might be that you could be, for example, because that Neptune's it's in the third house, but it's sort of second and third. But so maybe you could tell me a bit more about that. How do you see this as in your chart? Do you feel that there was, do you think there's I mean, with Sun Jupiter squaring Neptune, it could be, quite a lot of enjoyment needs to be had in life, I would say, possibly, but when one is self-indulged, there's a potential of self, I mean, I know there's about 13 years between us, right? I'm 1967, but I also have a Jupiter Neptune square. Amazingly, just so happens, and I'm quite an imaginative person, I suppose. But what I'm trying to say though is, how do you see that Jupiter Neptune playing out in your life? Do you feel that maybe that you aim for more self-indulgence in things a little bit more, and not necessarily, or do you find it difficult to handle, say, possessions and money? Is it a little bit of carelessness sometimes in things?
Well, I don't have my own money. I've been thinking about that a lot, because I had my studio, which we both worked really hard at it, and it never really kind of was it was rewarding in different ways. It never made us any money, and then I've kind of felt then I kind of did worked so hard for it, but actually haven't actually got much to show for it. So right. I'm not sure if I've ever been that good with money. So my partner has got all the money, and then because I haven't been working much recently because of Jessie, I've now found myself thinking I really need to have some more money now, because I do like things.
Yes.
And I do like to spend, and I do like nice things, and I do like spending money on nice things as well. So if that's what you mean, if that's that sort of thing. So maybe a little bit carelessness with money, and then finding myself without money as well.
All right.
Even though I'm,
Well, that's and so therefore, do you feel that that's can you see that in that Jupiter, because that's a theme of Jupiter Neptune, can be a bit oriented around that, and I have also had similar kind of issues to do with that, actually, funnily enough, and I could show you my chart. In fact I might just do that, because it'll teach you something as well. Do you see what I'm trying to say? We'll look at different charts tonight. Is that okay? But then I'm actually what I'm doing though is I've gone off and then I'm not doing hemispheres anymore, and I need to be teaching you hemispheres. I too easy I can go off on a tangent. So let's stick to hemispheres and quadrants tonight, okay? And describing the idea of what these house cusps are, okay? So we looked at the 6th house, all right? And you've got an idea from looking at the 9th and the 6th, and maybe we could look at the 5th as well, or or the 8th if you like, or we can just move on and say, let's look at another part of the chart. It's interesting that the Western hemisphere of your chart, this whole portion here, which is houses, starts with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, is to do with a sense of collaborations with people. It can be very much focused on doing things based on the wants and needs of the people around themselves, and so you might be very naturally focused on your own set of decisions and how you direct your life, and I think that's probably quite an important factor, but that Chiron being very close to the 8th, as you just said, is about the 8th house being related to money, and so Chiron, the Chiron there, I think, speaks about this being close to the 8th, because the 8th cusp is in Taurus and Chiron's in Taurus. So there's I think this is a lot to do with the issues that you experience around money, you know, and that is yet to be. You haven't had your Chiron return yet, you know, so that's a few years away for you. But Chiron's around about here at the moment in Aries, and but that is, you know, that later on you'll understand that Chironic.
What happens when that happens?
Well, Chiron is a sense of it's not an easy point. Okay, Chiron is not an easy. It's not actually a planet. Actually, it's kind of like a kind of comet that got stuck in the orbit around the sun, and it takes 52 years to go round as an orbit. You know, so it takes a 52-year cycle. So everyone gets their Chiron return at 52. It's usually that's quite healing, because Chiron was considered to be a great teacher and a healer. And the story of Chiron is how it's a centaur, and I've told this story, you know, quite a, because it's a very good way of describing it. You know, is the centaur who poisoned himself with his own poison that he promised he wasn't going to use. So, well, basically, this centaur lived in a cave in Greece, and one of the great Greek heroes came along. I think it was Achilles, and said, Chiron, I've got this battle coming up, and I need this really effective poison to use against my enemies. And Chiron said, oh, I don't make poisons. I just don't do that, you know. And Achilles, oh, please, oh, come on, Chiron, you know, you could do something good. Come on, like, you know, nudge, come on, do something for me, kind of stuff. And Chiron said, oh, all right then. So he made this very effective and powerful poison, and he tipped a whole bunch of arrows and gave Achilles this quiver of arrows and said, go on then, off you go. So Achilles charged off into battle, and Chiron was a bit curious to see how the battle was going. So he went across to the battle lines, to the edges of the skirmish or the fight, and he noticed that Achilles' arrows had been stolen, or, you know, by the enemy. They were firing the arrows back across, and one of the arrows was a bit off center or stray arrow, and it hit Chiron in his hoof. So Chiron was poisoned by his own poison, and it made him lame, and he couldn't do anything about it. And he was just like, oh my God. And he staggered off to his cave, and he was in agony because he was an immortal. Already he was an immortal because he'd been born of a god. He was a illegitimate son of Zeus. And so he couldn't die. So he was having this constant pain. And he was just like, oh God, what am I going to do? Oh, you know. And basically, he begged the gods, you know, to let him die. They eventually did let him die. They turned him into a constellation in the sky. So he was allowed to become mortal in order to, you know, get his release. So in the chart, Chiron is linked to and related to the wound that keeps on giving us a sense of pain or suffering in our lives. And so with respect to that, you have Chiron in Taurus, which is about self-value and self-worth, and it's in the 8th house, which is about resources and money from other people. And it's aspected because it actually squares Chiron. It squares the North Node and the South Node as well. So I think you are, you know, there's a strong element of almost like being a healer, with respect to teaching, of showing people something to do with money, whilst feeling very sensitive about that yourself. There's a lot of sensitivity about resources and money, whilst at the same time you're maybe relating to people about that, or talking to people about that in such a way. There may be something that's a kind of relationship, because it's in the relationship sector of your chart, and so it might be that it's a kind of something that is like a well, maybe, you know, it's up to you to want to talk further about that. Actually, you know, I've lined a few conceptual ideas up there, and then, you know, the 8th house is, as I said, is to do with money from other people. So it's things like bank, but it's also it's inheritances, legacies, testaments, wills, but it's also mortgages, bank loans, and things like that. Okay, so it's how money, and Taurus is the money sign. Okay, is Taurus likes to have things, and is quite the material collector, if you like, or the consumer, because it's about enjoying. You know, Taurus likes to enjoy things in life, so it often involves like, what can I have? Taurus says, you know, because it's the, you know, so that's kind of how Taurus works. To have Chiron there is to have a link to feeling very sensitive about resources, and it can cause, you know, issues in life. You know, Chiron's one of the most, it's one of the best points to go if someone wants to tell you about their healing. You know, you know, I need to be healed. Something's in my life that's in the way, or, you know, I need to be released in a way of my tension, or my healing, or my problem, or my suffering. And when you start to do astrology for people, you can go to Chiron as a fairly key, you know, straight in there to work out a problem. You know, and some people, if you bring in counseling as well, you know, you become a counselor and you really open up to people talking, you know, which is, I've done a bit of counseling, but I tend to, my nature is to talk a lot. If I was to open the channels for people to talk a lot more, you know, which is, you know, probably I should learn to do that, you know, a bit more. But the thing is it, you know, Chiron is the box of tissues, you know, right? So if you do Chiron, you're going to have on hand the people who go, you know, because sometimes it can be really, really super sensitive, you know, and I hope I haven't cracked it open too much today. You know, I didn't intend to.
No,
you know,
no.
but
No.
it's a super sensitive area, you know, Chiron. So there's a sense of you know, really trying to work with it, you know, and when it comes around, if I give you an example right now, okay, so I had a Chiron return 2 years ago, and it all came clear to me, right? I was just like, oh God, and it's stuff that you see, I've gone off on a tangent again today, but I'm sure that in terms of the recording and things, I'm going to tell you this now, you know, because I'm sort of flowing with the story, you know, but I have, I'll show you, well, I suppose I could show you my chart, but let me just tell you right now what I'm getting, right? I've got Chiron's in Aries at the moment, and it's on my Saturn. I'm getting Chiron by transit is going over my Saturn, and Saturn rules skin, teeth, and bones. And about a month ago, I had a sudden pain in one of my teeth. I went to the dentist, and they said, "Oh, it's a wisdom tooth, you know, blah blah blah. You know, we can either put a filling in it, which is X amount, or we can extract it. And because it's a wisdom tooth, you could just get it pulled. Yeah, you ain't gonna miss it, kind of stuff." And they convinced me, God knows why, but they convinced me to pull it. So I went to the dentist. I said, "Go on then," you know, and they did. And it took them about 5 minutes to do, right? And the day afterwards, right, 2 days later, you know, I started feeling a bit of pain, you know, still. And I was just like, So I went back and I said, "It's kind of hurting, you know." And they said, "Oh, it seems to be looking all right, you know," and didn't really tell me much, didn't really help me at all, actually. And it's carried on. And I'm now doing, you know, doing painkillers, you know, to get over it, because it still hurts in this area here. I feel it creeping up into here, and it's really doing my head in, right? And it's the Saturn, it's Chiron on my Saturn, it's the pain and the suffering, right?
Yeah.
And I can't believe it, you know, I just can't believe it that Chiron's doing that to me at the moment. You know, it's just like, oh, darn it, because my teeth and you know, very frustrating. You know, Chiron doing stuff is going to be a lesson to learn that's usually to do with pain and suffering, right? So but the key, because the symbol of Chiron looks like a bit like a key, it's also the key to healing, right? So it does heal as well once you work it out and you work how to use it in such a way that it can become like a healer. So, you know, your Chiron's at 17 degrees of Taurus and it trines Jupiter and the Sun. And again, you do some teaching, you know, and you help others, right? And that builds your sense of self-worth. You know, the Chiron is, you know, opposite sort of, you know, it's about getting freedom. You know, you need to, you know, how can you do the Chiron to give yourself more of what you want? You know, it's kind of how you got to work that, you know, because Chiron's in Aries at the moment and in your sort of 6th house. It'll cross your descendant. I can't remember. I think it's going to take about another 2 years or 3 years before it crosses your descendant. That's probably when you're still going to start doing charts.
In when?
Oh, I mean, and earning good money from it, because
3 years.
I think, yeah, about 2 years, yeah, because when Chiron crosses the descendant, it then comes up into the hemisphere, goes up into the 6th, into the 7th. You know, from this point when Chiron crosses the descendant, the rest of your life pretty much will be Chiron in the top half of the chart, right? Because you'll be 52 when you get to here, right? And then, you know, well, live life another, you know, it's you know, probably most of the time it'll be in the top of the chart, you know. And so basically it'll be a sense of you know, I mean, whatever, you know, you might live to an excellent old age, and one hopes you will, of course, you know, but it's going to be that top half will be when your career can change to become more of a healer, and you could price yourself really well, right, by being intuitive, because you've got planets in Virgo, okay, which is careful analysis, right? So I showed you that form tonight, and you've got planets in Virgo. That form's going to come in really useful for you when you start to do chart interpretation, because you can get it right down to being really accurate. And if you do a short course in counseling as well, yeah, or a course in counseling, you know, I mean, you can go the whole thing. You could do you know, what is it, psychotherapy, or, you know, one of these sort of things, which takes a few years actually, but you could just do counseling, you know, and be an astrologer and a counselor. And you live in the area around Hayward Heath and Cookfield and Linfield, aren't you? You're that sort of area?
No, I'm that's where I'm from, but I'm in Tunbridge Wells.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A great place.
Really
a great place to be an astrologer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very good area to be in.
Yeah.
And you know, do the counseling. I think you should do the counseling, right? And Chiron will then help you to really generate resources.
Yeah, I never thought that. I'll think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say don't put massive investments into things, right? Don't necessarily put massive investments into things. So don't, you know, you probably wouldn't need to start an astrology shop or anything like that. Not with Chiron in the 8th. Don't do that with Chiron in the 8th. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Don't, you know, it's more of, with astrology, you can just sort of be yourself, really, you know, and find places to work from, rather than, you know, that's what I'd say, because the Chiron is squaring stuff in your chart, squares the nodes, opposes Mars and Uranus. You know, I think you need a lot of freedom with Chiron opposite Uranus as well. So, but, you know, your freedom to do your own thing. But that, again, will be later on in life, you know, later on, everything later on, you know, because you know, you got to get Chiron, go over your descendant, and then see what happens then. You know, that'll be quite interesting, by the way, you know, because that will be something very important with regards to relationships, and whatever happens then.
I'm sure what someone said to me once, and maybe it was Robin or someone had said, "Oh, you're okay because everyone else around you's got money," or something like that. It was along those lines, like you don't actually, I haven't got my own, but everyone else around me has. If that makes sense.
Yes, it
Someone
does.
has said that to me before.
Yeah, it does. And in a way, you know, that's it. That is that Chiron in the eighth. You see?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense now? You know, like
Yeah.
Good.
And I've been thinking about we've actually just had we were going to move, and we just had our buyers have just pulled out, and they pulled out on my birthday actually, and the house we were going to go to, which again now we've lost. It's all been a bit of a funny few weeks actually, and like with my tooth and stuff and this and. The house we were going to buy had a lovely summer house, which I was going to convert into a studio. So I was going to then work. I thought, oh, I could teach from there. And then once I can do my astrology, I can have like my own space. But that's all fallen through now. So that's been.
I'm sure you'll find another one, a better one.
Yeah, a better, exactly.
You know, keep the wish list open and see what happens next.
Yeah. But now that's put a spanner in my works for getting back to working again. So now I've got to kind of rethink.
Yeah. And whereabouts were you moving to, by the way? Tunbridge Wells still?
Yeah, not far. Just in the country a little bit more. Jessie and the dog and us, and you know, kind of, it was a house that kind of had a little bit for everyone. Great.
But
you never know, do you? It was like right up until we were just gonna week before exchanging, they pulled out. So kind of then messes everything else.
It's fairly safe to say that you will find the right house.
Yeah.
Because it will be your retreat center, right? Eventually, because the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was exactly on your IC of your chart, right? On an angle. Yeah. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that occurred December 2020. Yeah. So about 8 months ago or 9 months. Oh, it's 10 months ago now, right? So December the 21st. That was Jupiter Saturn on the nadir here. Exactly, they were at 0 degrees. They met at 0 degrees. So that set in place that point. And you have Jupiter and Saturn conjunct the Sun in Virgo. And this could be seen as the retreat center that's healthy and, you know, helps others and things like that. So in the long run, the Jupiter Saturn is saying you'll have a good home base, you know, to set up a good solid Aquarian, maybe slightly unconventional home base, you know, like something unique and different that you can find for yourself. Again, in the shape of a studio or a barn or whatever it will be, you know, but I'm sure you'll find the right place, you know. And the one that didn't happen this time around is because something else is going to be lined up. You'll find something else better. Just give it a bit of time to let it develop, you know, and something really good will come. So something will happen, you know, that will be really nice. So there we go, right on. So so that's probably so I've done lots of off tangent stuff, and we ended up doing a Chiron kind of lesson, but we're gonna now go to so let's have a look at a couple more hemisphere charts, all right, just quickly. All right, so let's look at we'll look at your suns, shall we? Yeah. So what do you see here? Right, tell me what you see with respect to the planets, and think about things like the closest planets that are really focused on the personality.
So then he's got a lot in his first house, which is like, and the sun, which is the self, isn't it? The sun, the self, and then the first house is about yourself, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So
then that half of the hemisphere is about the inner world. So like I think you said, then maybe a little bit more introverted, and he is Cancer, and I already can see him being a bit like that, and his little moods that he has, and he's very shy, can be quite very shy. Anyway, that's that. So there, so that's the sun and the moon, and then he's got, and then on the other side it's then the opposites, and then it's the southern hemisphere.
So he's absolutely. So if you draw the line here across the descendant, first, then and count that as do houses 1 to 6 first. Okay, there we go. Right. So you're looking there at saying, there's 1, 2, 3. You know, you count the node as well. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sun and moon. You know, for a start. amazing. Like, I mean, it all, as in this hemisphere is going to be very strong, very focused below the horizon, so he's born just before sunrise, so this is he still actually has a nighttime chart, and so there'll be a strong focus, on things like safety and security and family matters, they're very Cancerian. And but the moon in Leo is very demonstrative, right? And so he will draw attention to himself by the use of his values, right? So he could be, and because that moon trines Jupiter, right? Quite nice. Can you see the trine across here? So moon's at 14, Jupiter's at 16. So the moon's applying to trine to Jupiter in Sag, and Jupiter is in its own sign there. He would probably be potentially very good at doing his own thing, right? Like a kind of like self-employed businessman, like running his own business, for example, might be something he could do later on. But he will draw attention to himself by his values and his sense of self-worth and self-esteem. So he could be, I mean, Moon and Leo make good actors, I mean, as in they, quite showy. He could be on stage, for example, a band, musician, maybe. But there's also that there's the businessman thing. I think there's something about there about being quite focused. He's got, Mars in Leo, Mercury in Leo. There's a lot of Leo planets there, and so. He could be, you need to let that creativity, express itself in some way,
Yeah.
And if he wants to stand on the stage and be center show, that should be kind of encouraged, to a certain, it's like, yeah, do it, be that person, and that could be, quite good for him in a way. And the sun opposite Saturn, but he's, there's a lessons to learn there about how he works with other people. But I think that moon in Leo will be great for self-expression, and creativity. Immediately I think of someone with moon in Leo in the second house, and I have a second cousin who is a cartoonist, and just happens to have moon in Leo in the second house, and became a cartoonist, and started drawing cartoons at the age of about 14 or 15, and sent it into a magazine and got published when he was like 15 years old, but in Punch magazine, the old sort of satirical magazine. He got his first cartoons in there, and now he does the Metro cartoon every day, and the Metro newspaper, or most days. And so it's just quite good, right? As in a creativity, it's a creative thing, so to honor, and what he's got there is sun and moon in mutual reception, because the sun rules Leo, the moon rules Cancer, and he's got the sun in Cancer and the moon in Leo. So there's a unification there, they work well together, so those first two houses of his chart work very well together. He could be quite a canny investor, quite lucky with the moon trining Jupiter, quite popular as well at work with when it comes to work, because it's the moon's in the second, Jupiter's in the sixth. And so he might be someone who, here I am saying stuff and he's only like 2 years old. But just those sort of things, I hope you find that, later on down the line, useful insights, that moon in Leo will I said, it will definitely draw attention to itself. Maybe not for maybe not for the next year, but once Jupiter goes into Aries and trines that moon, then he'll activate that trine. That'll be a good year for him, which is next summer actually, right? So from round about sort of August, September, October, November next year, he'll have Jupiter doing stuff to his moon and Jupiter. That'll be quite good. And so yeah. Anyway, I hope that helps. Was that okay?
Yeah.
To look at hemispheres is to say, okay, so he's got stuff below the horizon, sun and moon, but also if you draw the line down here across the angles, so there's the meridian and the the midheaven and the IC, that's the angle there. So one hemisphere is now this side, yeah, and look how much is there. I mean, there's, you can now include Venus into that collection of planets, and you've got like, well, Chiron, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter on this side. So there's he will be focusing on what he wants, very much so, whilst keeping an eye on how to develop his own career by paying attention to how others make their he'll make his decisions about his career by listening to other people, I think, because that sort of Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter is all about, well, Saturn and Jupiter and Saturn are all about career, how one integrates into society. Pluto is, well, we can leave that out for now, but because they are on that hemisphere that is the Western Hemisphere, that he would have potentially quite good career collaborations, and maybe quite adaptable to opportunities. Yeah, there we go. Anyway, so there's some thoughts. Is there anybody else in your groupings here that, because we could look at possibly Justin's or Samantha's chart or Robin's if you wanted to?
Yeah, whoever. Yeah.
Okay, so well, should we just look at Robin's? I'm sure she won't mind.
No.
So Robin's got, if you look straight away, she's got mostly here in houses 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3. So again, there's a very strong focus on the Eastern Hemisphere here. Most planets over on that side, not so much on this side. 2 outers in Chiron and a node. So that's, quite a strong sort of, very clearly says the planet's all on one side. Yeah. So self-orientation, making decisions based on her own wants and needs at the time of the decision. And then also and then the other hemisphere being houses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which of course is the Northern Hemisphere, we call that. And again, that has, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, so it's got a lot of stuff below the horizon as well. She's got, so there's a sense of being quite a little bit introspective or introvert, but finding solutions to problems and finding that strength within, a lot of within strength, so and I've always got the impression she is quite a strong character, very strong character, so it's like and I think she does cope with things in that sort of way, it has quite a lot, just gets on with things, so so yeah, there we go. That's just a sort of quite a good idea there for and is it your brother Justin?
Yes.
Who has, as you can see here, all his planets pretty much in the Southern Hemisphere, in the top half of the chart. And he has quite a public position, he has quite a, he's kind of the guy behind the scenes, isn't he, rather than someone who's actually noticed, but he's doing stuff by millions of people technically, right? So so there is quite a projection out into the world. It is actually just graphic imagery, and what, when I say just, I mean it's graphic imagery and what he does, but it's very key to like being noticed. It's not him himself, but it's what he does gets put out to the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of put out. Yeah. So and that's quite, fire planets, because he's got Venus in Aries, Sun in Aries, Mercury in Aries, Moon in Leo. He's a very fiery person, you know. So there's a lot of fire planets there, you know, and therefore, you know, a strong requirement to be self-expressive, yeah, to generate a sort of energy, a creative energy.
Yeah, he's very creative, and he's very funny as well.
Yeah,
very sort of, and he's very good at being the center
right,
of
excellent.
attention. And yeah,
I've met
It's
him a
that
few
area.
times actually. Yeah, and he is good at that. and the ascendant in Leo as well, of course, which is the that sort of slightly fiery approach to life as well, you know. So again, creatively dominant, you know, has attained a very you know, I suppose, well, yes, it's a respectful position, isn't it? He's innovation, and because it's Aries, the sun in Aries is very innovative. So, you know, they say they're good at self-starting things, you know, get things going, you know. And I think he's been very creative with the equipment that he uses, you know. I think he's invented things, hasn't he? Am I right in thinking that he's been quite the inventor? Or
yeah. And when we were he has. And when we were young and all living together at home, I don't even know how he used to do it, but he used to like put these like films together and just do all these like special effects on where he'd like just video him and his mates like messing around and that. And so, and it's all self-taught, all this stuff. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Good. So that gives you an idea of how a hemisphere of projecting stuff out into the world.
Yeah.
So there's a few more choices of different charts, and maybe you look at Samantha as well.
Yeah.
And so if we look at that hemisphere, then her MCIC axis goes this way. Now this is quite interesting because she's got kind of half planets on one side and half on another side. But the focus is probably with the more quicker moving planets. You know that Mercury and Venus will always be quite close to the sun. They don't stray far from the sun. Mercury never goes farther than 28 degrees from the sun, and Venus doesn't go farther than 47 degrees, I believe. So they're always relatively close. So more often than not, they tend to be on one hemisphere, on one side, you know, in one particular area, because they're quite close together, you know. In Samantha's case, she's got also Jupiter and the Moon with Uranus and Pluto, and Mars here. So there's a strong emphasis as well as with home life, you know. And because the IC's here, and therefore stuff to do with home life, Moon, and all the things. And I remember, if I'm right in remembering this, Robin was telling me about this. They had massive problems with a house, didn't they? Something.
Oh yeah.
I mean, yeah. So I remember Robin telling me about this a number of years ago now, you know. But they did
still
have.
going, I think.
Is it still going? Right, yeah. So and look how all those planets there in the sort of this side of the IC, so they're kind of in the fourth house, you know, third, fourth, you know, very much to do with dwelling places, home life, the local neighborhood, that sort of stuff. Pluto, Jupiter, the south node, Uranus, the Moon, a lot going on here, you know. That might not necessarily be it's caused her quite a lot of stress and problems, you know, I believe. Would I be right in thinking that?
Yeah, definitely.
And look how these oppositions are, you know. Look at old Chiron there, you know, Chiron in the mix, you see, and Venus in Aries. Sometimes Venus not so happy in Aries, and you know, there's a lot about these oppositions here, you know, that sort of like creating quite a lot of tension between what is valued, Venus, versus other things, you know. and there's a lot going on here that sort of suggests a lot of, quite a lot of hassle, I think, for her. Yeah, so that, if you just look at the hemispheres, it's an interesting kind of division there, because the northern hemisphere, or rather, beg your pardon, the eastern hemisphere, which has got Venus, Saturn, Sun, and Mercury in it, is very much to do with what she wants to do, her self-orientation, doing things for herself. And then there's all this other stuff on the other side that's right embedded down in the base of the chart there in the northern hemisphere. So it's all below the horizon, and quite introspective, finding the strength to cope with stuff that goes on, in her life. So yeah. And the mutability of the chart, there's a few mutable planets I see in there as well. And mutability is adapting, variating, and changing, or a lot. That's what sometimes a mutable person will be like. I've done a chart. I remember doing a chart for someone who was just like, I've got to keep my job. It was actually at Selfridges in London. There was someone who came to see me at Selfridges in London. I was an astrologer there for a couple of weeks, one time a few years ago, and a lot of the staff came to see me, and one girl came to see me, quite really about early 20s, and she was like, I've been working here for like 3 or 4 years. I must keep working. I must keep working here. I said, are you good with changes and adaptation and variation? Because every single planet in her chart was mutable. Right? There was nothing that was, fixed, right? Or nothing, no cardinal either. Everything was mutable, and that's why it stood out in my mind, because I remember just going. I was like, I think you've got to recognize in yourself that you're not meant to stick at things, and that's what it was. She said, they're going to be doing some retirements. What do they call it? Where they get rid of people. Sorry, what's it called? Redundancy. Sorry, redundancies. Yeah, they're going to be doing some, and I'm really worried. I really want to keep the job and blah blah. And I could see that she probably was gonna not, And I said, well, don't worry, because you're meant to be variable and adaptable.
Yeah.
But she said, oh really? And I said, well, yeah, because I explained it to her what I was seeing in the chart. And I said, just go and I said, it's fine for you to go from one thing to the other, like keep drifting around, moving around, and do stuff like that, because that's what life's about, right? And she said, gosh, that makes so much sense. If only I'd been told that at school, or told that years ago, because I often get so stressed out about feeling that I can't hold on to anything, and that's what she came to me for, was because she was anxious about not being able to hold on to something, when other people can. I look at everyone else and they seem to be able to hold on things, but I never can. I said, well, you're not meant to. If that helps, I hope that helps. But you're meant to be kind of floating free, and do what you want. That's what's going to teach you everything you need to know. And it worked. The reading went brilliantly. She took my card. One day maybe she'll call me. So yeah. I'm just trying to say that, and that's when I show you that form earlier this evening, and it said count up all the planets and things. It's because I do so many charts. I do that automatically sometimes. I'm counting, going, oh yeah, boom, 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 boom. Those elements are represented. Oh, there's a missing element, or oh, there's a missing modality, so someone's all mutable and no cardinal, no fixed, or something, And these things stand out, So it's good to start getting fluent with that, because there'll often be a situation, where someone's like trying to do something, and then maybe it might help them better to know that there could be the tendency to be someone who could be a lot freer than they think they are. Does that make sense? You see what I'm trying to say? Yeah. Good. Right. So right. So there's a few more charts. Yeah. And let's have a quick look at quadrants. Right. We're going to go back to your chart, Steph. Okay. And we're going to quickly do quadrants, right? Because I've noticed how the time's going, but you've got quite a lot of other things in the lesson today. So look at the page quadrants, and take a count, please. So quadrant 1 is from the ascendant to the nadir. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's quadrant 1. So and so please tell me which houses is that, please.
1, 2, 3.
Very good. And what planets do you have in quadrant 1?
Mars.
Yes.
And Uranus.
Yes.
And then the Moon and Neptune.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent. And so with those planets there, one could say there'll be areas of your life that are quite inward and personal, with maybe a little bit of self-centeredness is a good thing sometimes for some people, by the way. It's an important attribute in a personality to sometimes think of oneself before others. Sometimes you can look at, say, a planet, someone with lots of planets in Pisces, and they can totally sacrifice themselves for others, and that can be it's like, what I'm trying to say there is, it's good to have sometimes focuses on yourself, and so your Mars focuses on yourself, and your Moon, and so that's good, right? You see what I'm trying to say there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what do you have in quadrant 2? Quadrant 2 is houses. What's that? Tell me what you've got there.
4, 5, and 6.
Very good.
So the IC.
Yeah.
And then that's the north node, isn't it?
It's when the horseshoe shape is shaped that way round, it's the south node.
And then that's it, isn't it?
Yes, that's it. Yeah. So we're not going to really count that as being any major influence on the chart. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, we can talk about nodes later on as a separate point, but there's no planets there, right? So we'll say, okay, no planets there. And then tell me about quadrant 3. What's quadrant 3? The houses and things.
So 7, 8, 9. So then descendant and Chiron.
Correct. So Chiron being the only planet in that, or planetoid, because it is just a comet, it's not a planet. So in that area of the chart. And now we get to quadrant 4. Tell me about quadrant 4.
So 10, 11, and 12.
Yes.
Which is where most of them are. So MC, Venus, and then the North Node.
Excellent.
And then Jupiter, Sun, Saturn, Mercury, and Pluto.
Very good. Very good. So clearly quadrant 4 is about taking, for you, it's about action taken to incorporate into the outer world. It's a career. It's the projection into the outer world. It's to be noticed and to be seen, doing things, attaining public position, working with groups, which is what you do, spiritual stimulation, which is what you're doing, because Pilates is quite a spiritual thing. It's focusing on the body and integrating mind and body, isn't it? And astrology is something you're doing, which is ultimately the most cerebral of the lot. So it's about kind of also the idea of developing awareness about the world, and with a view maybe to being someone who could help others with the Jupiter, Sun, and Saturn in Virgo. Maybe there's something about there that you would really like to improve the world in some way, to be recognized for making some improvements, maybe in the holistic area, something like that could be, how you shine in the long run. So yeah, there we go. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good.
Definitely helps the breaking down of the chart, because if you just look at a chart, it's so overwhelming with everything, and then but actually breaking it down into the quadrants and the hemispheres, and then looking at it, it makes it much easier to approach it.
Perfect. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
Because this
Otherwise,
is where we're
just
starting. Thank you. Sorry. Say.
No. Otherwise, it's just lots of symbols, isn't it? And that, and yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And it's the interpretation. That's the, it's learning all the different planets and everything, and then it's the interpretation of it is actually the hard bit.
Yes.
One of the harder bits, isn't it?
Yes. But this is a good starting point. I mean, if you break it down into quadrants and hemispheres, and say, for example, someone has everything in one quadrant, well, you're going to be saying, well, tell us about that part of your life, and they could then, talk a lot about that, and that sort of thing, I mean, it's just that, and it is about analyzing the chart. You have to, it is a thing that can be pulled apart, for that's the whole idea of the chart, I think, is we look at all the separate parts, and then we redefine it as the one again, and the one being the self, many layers becoming one again, which is what life is all about, really. So
and it's quite actually hard looking. It's actually quite hard. It's probably harder looking at your own chart, isn't it? Do you think that? Because you have or you can, or maybe.
Well, I think
you're looking into yourself. So maybe, I mean, that's a good thing to do that, isn't it? And you're learning, but I don't know.
I definitely like to have other astrologers looking at my chart for me. And but I've gotten to become very aware of myself. So I can see the patterns. I can't necessarily change the patterns. I see them very clearly, though. So I know myself when I'm being in a particular way. And sometimes I can see, the ups and downs of life, as it were, how I am with stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's an objective art, because you do stand back and look at it, so it's something that you go, so it's like it's a stand back viewpoint thing. But what I guess what I'm doing in my astrology research at the moment is I'm finding a way to bring the geocentric back, because charts are drawn, they say, from the geocentric position, from being on Earth. We're on Earth looking out into space, and that chart represents what was going on from the perspective of standing on Earth, which is that's where you were born, or where we were all born, so the sense of, I've got this thing going on now where I'm trying to bring back a very, I'll have to tell you about it. I might, we're getting to quite close. I'll stop the recording at this point. So have I said enough today about quadrants and hemispheres, by the way?
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, cool. And so I will stop the recording.
Learn.